All right. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight on From Poe to the Present, which is going to be a wide-spanning talk on horror fiction, a lot of horror short stories. Our panel tonight is Gwendolyn Kiste, Nathan Ballingrud, Wendy and Wagner, Gabino Iglesias, and Cina Pelayo. It's awesome to have them all here. We're wicked excited to hear them just talk about all sorts of crazy cool stuff. And before we jump in, I'm going to read their bios because it's super important to know who people are. So Nathan Ballingrud is a writer living in Asheville, North Carolina. His most recent book is Wounds, 6 Stories from the Border of Hell from Saga Press. His first book is North American Lake Monsters from Small Beer Press. He has won 2 Shirley Jackson Awards and has been shortlisted for the World Fantasy, British Fantasy, and Bram Stoker Awards. His novella, The Visible Filth, was made into a movie called Wounds from Annapurna Pictures. Then we've got Gabino Iglesias. Gabino is a writer, professor, book reviewer, editor, and translator living in Austin, Texas. He is the author of Zero Saints and Coyote Songs and the editor of Both Sides. His work has been translated into 5 languages, optioned for film, nominated for the Bram Stoker Award and the Locust Award, and won the Wonderland Book Award for Best Novel in 2019. His reviews appear regularly in places like NPR, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Gwendolyn Kiste is the Bram Stoker Award-winning author of Rust Maidens, Bone Set and Feathers, and Her Smile Will Untether the Universe, Pretty Mary's All in a Row, and The Invention of Ghosts. Her short fiction and nonfiction have appeared in Nightmare Magazine, Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, Basterian, Tor's Nightfire, The Dark, and Daily Science Fiction, among others. Originally from Ohio, she now resides in an abandoned horse farm outside of Pittsburgh with her husband, 2 cats, and not nearly enough ghosts. Next, we have Cynthia or Cina Pelayo. She is a 2-time Bram Stoker Award nominated poet and author. She is the author of La Teoria, Santa Muerte, The Missing, and Poems of My Night, all of which have been nominated for International Latino Book Awards. Poems of My Night was also nominated for an Elgin Award. Her recent collection of poetry, Into the Forest and All the Way Through, explores true crime, that of the epidemic of missing and murdered women in the United States, and was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award and Elgin Award. Her modern-day horror retelling of the Pied Piper fairy tale, Children of Chicago, was released earlier this year by Agora Paulus Books. And we've finally got Wendy and Wagner. Wendy is the editor-in-chief of Nightmare Magazine and the managing senior editor for Lightspeed. Her short stories, essays, and poems run the gamut from horror to environmental literature. Her longer work includes the novella, The Secret Skin, which is forthcoming at the end of October, the horror novel, The Deer Kings, the Locust bestselling SF, or science fiction eco-thriller, An Oath of Dogs, and 2 novellas for the Pathfinder role-playing game, which I think is wicked cool. She lives in Oregon and she lives in Oregon with her very understanding family, 2 large cats, and a Muppet disguised as a dog. So that's everything as far as our intros go. We're going to start off with a very standard, fun question that's important to all of our listeners out there. What is your big book that just came out? Do you have like a quick elevator pitch for it? Or like, if you hate elevator pitches, just like ramble about what you're doing, I guess. So, take it away, Gabino, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Sure. It'll be out in August, but never too early to start talking about it. I sold it to Mulholland Books, and I'm incredibly excited. It's, you know me, so it's like a very funny, romantic, middle grade book titled The Devil Takes You Home. And I can't wait to start talking about it and doing readings and sharing it with the world. Oh, wait, elevator pitch. Crap.
It doesn't have to be an elevator pitch.
Here's the first line of the novel. Leukemia. A father loses his daughter and then his entire life crumbles, so he turns to crime to pay medical bills, and monsters and bad things ensue. How's that?
Ooh, exciting. Yay. Well, I just had a book drop at the end of August. It's called The Deer Kings, and it's a horror novel set on the Oregon coast, because I'm from Oregon, and it kind of goes back and forth between 1989 and now, and it's about these kids that make this like supernatural protector, and then as adults, they wind up inadvertently coming back to their hometown. They find out that the people there are worshiping their creation as a god, and it's all about human sacrifice. And of course, what's the best sacrifice for a god but its creator? So these kids are in peril now.
All right, I'll go. We're doing that thing that we all do, right? Like nobody wants to be the next person to go. So my most recent book is Bone Set and Feathers, and it came out last year from Broken Eye Books. And yeah, it's about witches and witch hunts and dead birds falling from the sky and ghosts and graveyards. So if that's your thing, that's my most recent book, Bone Set and Feathers. And my next novel is coming out next year from Saga Press, Reluctant Immortals, and that is about Lucy Westenra from Dracula and Bertha Antoinetta Mason from Jane Eyre in 1967, Summer of Love, taking down Dracula and Rochester. So that is my next book out next year.
Yay, that sounds so fun.
My last book was Children of Chicago. It is a hybrid horror, mystery, thriller, nonfiction, fairy tale, and elevator pitch. The city of Chicago is a setting for a dark fairy tale where the Pied Piper has returned to lure the city's children away. So a sequel is in the works, which has nothing to do with the first books, but it's more just like I guess we're calling it the Chicago saga. And book 2 is a completely different monster, same setting, city of Chicago, and the only hint I will give you is it deals with movie theaters.
Ooh, cool.
Very neat. Very neat.
So my last book, my most recent, is Wounds, the one that was mentioned in the introduction. It's a collection of short stories. The centerpiece of that one is a story called The Butcher's Table, which is kind of like my homage to Hammer Horror and EC Comic. It's got satanic cults, pirates, the Candlelight Society. It was a lot of fun to write. I just threw everything that I loved in there. And the next thing coming down the pike is a book called The Strange. It just finished edits, so it's got a little ways to go through the pipeline. But the elevator pitch for that is True Grit meets The Martian Chronicles. Takes place on, this is more dark fantasy than it is horror, but it takes place on Mars in 1930. About a young girl who is looking for justice and finds that the world doesn't work quite the way that she thought and hoped that it did.
That sounds great.
All of those sound excellent, and I can't wait to buy them for the library. Being a librarian is such like a ridiculous job in the sense that like you get to hear all these amazing books and you're like, ooh, and I have a budget of a couple $1,000s in which to buy all those books. It's cool. So if you're looking for a job out there, consider being a librarian. The second question, let's start with Wendy. So looking back at Poe, who's the main reason we're here right now, looking back at Poe as one of the forefathers of the horror genre, what like elements and characteristics would you say define an early horror story, and what influences can we cite as coming directly from Mr. Poe today?
I mean, I feel like this could be a PhD, like an entire dissertation, really. But I think like Poe, his work really captures that wonderful peak Gothic feeling, right? Like there's hauntings, there's madness. So much of his work is really focused on madness and concerns about like how the mind works. And I think he's kind of coming from a time that's like the beginning of psychological treatment of people. I know here in Oregon, we have like one of the world's most famous mental hospitals. You might have seen it in a little film called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And it's a design that was kind of standardized throughout the United States, that was built around the same time that Poe, right there on the end of like the Civil War, at the time that Poe was starting to write. And people were really delving into like, how can we treat mental illness? And is it a moral issue? Like, are people who have mental illness, are they bad? Are they curable? Is this like, do they need to be shut away from us forever? And, I think like those are issues that are in his work and kind of continue today as being issues that kind of pool down into our genre. So that's something that I always think of when I think of Poe a lot. Is that kind of thing. As well as just like awesome, like I feel like he takes like the idea of the haunted house and like really jacks it up to like the most morbid and despairing and grim that you can get. Yeah, I think he's like the god of crumbling manners. Just jumping in.
Oh, and I was gonna say, since I do cross genres, I think that we also have to recognize that Poe did so as well. Not only did he perfect the short story and is like the father of our father, essentially, as a horror writer, but in terms of mystery, like he invented the modern day detective in the Murders of the Rue Morgue, and here we're introduced to C. Auguste Dupin, which he isn't really like a law enforcement official. He's more of like a private type detective, and a lot of the characteristics that he has, we have seen that follow through Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, and that was a trilogy, The Mysteries of Marie Roget, which was probably one of the first pieces of like true crime inspired pieces of work, because it was inspired by a real murder. And then The Purloined Letter, which is like the third in that trilogy, and he called it his favorite piece of ratiocination, and it was a term that he gave to his pieces of fiction that would evoke detecting and this concept of detecting. So he really gave a lot of us crime horror writers these elements that we still play with today, with the investigation detectives, detectives that aren't necessarily like within law enforcement, but they are on their own. So I just wanted to talk about those three, because those are my three favorite pieces of Poe.
He was also so much into like cryptography, and he really like spiked a resurgence of interest in that. And I think like the idea of like hidden mysteries and secret codes is something that's really important to horror writing. I mean, look at what Lovecraft does with it just a few years down the road.
Another thing
you bring up Lovecraft. Sorry, Nathan. I was just going to say, sorry, it's funny you bring up Lovecraft, because like when I was little, like those were the two horror writers I knew. My dad and mom both loved Edgar Allan Poe, and then H.P. Lovecraft was like that other guy. And like it was always like in our family, it was like he's not as cool as Poe. And I grew up thinking that they were contemporaries, and they definitely were not. Like H.P. Lovecraft came years later and was much more modern and even crossed over with other like more modern authors. But yeah, I was always like, I love that you bring up Lovecraft, because in my mind when I was little, I'm like, no, he's not Poe. And I was like a total little snob about it from like the age of 4 or 5, like what a little jerk. But then I found out when I got older that Lovecraft was racist. And I'm like, see, I was right. My 4 or 5-year-old self was totally right. Like Poe was
The other thing I associate with Poe, first of all, what Wendy said with his obsession with writing about madness. But the other thing that I, in my mind, hook him up with is his romance with death, the absolute the love affair I think that he had with death and with decay. A couple stories, in which the woman that he was in love with was already gone, and in fact, I think that was the first. I think it was a Morella, if I'm remembering correctly, was the first one that I read like that, and I just. It just knocked me over. It was so beautifully rendered and so macabre, and unapologetically beautiful, though, in its appreciation of the macabre.
It's this beauty and decay that he does so fantastic. It's
yeah,
and it's tragic and it's madness. And a lot of his madness speaks to losing control, like losing the woman you love, losing the person you love. And what more horrific thing is there to lose your grip on yourself? And then he like lists that or explains it so well. It's terrifying.
Yeah, that always struck me with Poe, is just that premature death. There was always omnipresent death, and people were always dying very, very young in his work. And that, like, Annabelle Lee made me so sad when I was little. Like, even though The Raven is creepy, I remember Annabelle Lee haunted me more, because I was always like, no, I want her to live. Like, this was totally me when I was, again, 4 or 5. I'm like, no, I want her to live. No, she just needs to live. Like, you know, because you have this like magical thinking as a child. But yeah, that premature death, and that's like so gothic, obviously. But that always struck me with Poe, and how it was so much from his own life, and losing his wife very young and losing his mother very young. So it's, yeah, and when you know that, it makes it even more tragic, because it was so reflective of what actually happened to him.
Yeah, when I was, you haven't even had any chance to talk. You should go.
No, I just wanted to add, on top of everything that's been said, I think as writers, we turn to him for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, he was the prototype for, I'm going to make a living writing, you know, horrible things, and he died poor. So we go back to that and think like, all right, if it didn't work out for him, I'm fine. It's like, I can keep doing this. And the second one is that all of these things that we've been talking about, obsession with death and the gory stuff and the hauntings and the crumbling manners, he was the quintessential master of the short story tone and atmosphere, because we have this world built in our heads for each one of those stories, like the Casco of Amontillado or the Black Cat, and they were short stories. He didn't have 300 pages to pull us in, but he had tone and atmosphere from the opening line, and then you were pulled in. And I think we all strive to do that. Just, you know, if you listen to the blues, scholars say everybody's still trying to sound like B.B. King, and I think when we read that first line of a horror short story, we're trying to do that, nail it. We're here. I don't have to spend 3 paragraphs telling you about the walls and the moss and all that stuff. I'll just pull you in immediately, because I've achieved that level of you know, being a master like Poe. And we do that every day, and we fail, and so we try again the next day.
Oh, so well said, man. Thanks.
Thank you. But I interrupted you, Wendy. So.
Oh gosh, I don't know what I was gonna say, but I did want to mention that I just was flipping through my Poe collection before this, and I was like, man, that guy could rock an M dash, right? Like.
I wanted to share this with you. So I don't know if anyone knows what the Poe toaster is, and if you don't, Google the Poe toaster. It was a person that used to go and toast at Poe's grave every day, or every year on his birthday. I would go to Baltimore to take part in this ritual. And so the curator of the Poe House and Museum gifted me a piece of Poe's house.
What?
From Baltimore. This is when they were doing construction on the building. So I have a piece of Poe's house in my house.
Whoa.
So I wanted to share that with you all on this Poe discussion. But I mean, he's been very important to me, so much so that I would go to Baltimore on his birthday, where I did it for a few years for that ritual to sing happy birthday to Poe. And as a poet, I feel like what Gabino says about we're all trying to come back to this in his terms of his short stories. And I know as a poet, I always turn back to Annabelle Lee, the bells, like these, especially the bells, it just hits me so hard. And Annabelle Lee as well, just the way, what he was able to do with text. And then you can even hear it, like as you read it aloud. And so one thing I would recommend to people, if you haven't read Poe's poetry aloud, sit down and read it aloud. It's just so powerful.
So does that little piece of his house like whisper to you at night?
Yeah, no. But you can even see the horse, because they would use horsehair, like
yeah.
You can see the bits of the horsehair. But yeah, that was gifted to me like in a ceremony like a few years ago for people that would go as hardcore Poe toasters. So it's a very special piece in my house.
That's fantastic.
That's neat.
Some wicked funny thing that I completely forgot to talk about in the beginning of this. I almost always say this before a Zoom meeting because it's like interesting fact about Sturgis Library, which is where I am right now, is we're the oldest building in America housing a library. So it's built in 1644 and it's insanely haunted. So whenever you say you have like an old piece of a house, I'm like, there are so many ghosts in this library by itself. Like it's crazy. Like we have a door upstairs that like it just opens itself all the time, and it's one of those doors you can like violently shake and nothing happens. So if you're on Cape Cod at any point in time and want to come see this haunted house, stop on by.
Are you working on I hope you're working on a novel about this library.
It's in so many short stories. But maybe someday I should someday. So let's start with Cina on this next one. How has the field of horror changed since Poe and his contemporaries were writing? And can you point to any other big turning points for the genre that have led us to where we are today?
Such a heavy, big question. So I will kick it off with starting in the present, and then I will let my peers discuss further. But I think just even looking at today, we have seen a major shift, especially when Poe was writing fiction, and even Gwendolyn mentioned H.P. Lovecraft. Even when Lovecraft was writing fiction, the dominant group were men, and we have seen this huge explosion of women writing horror, and I think it's amazing. And it's not just not just women, but like it's just the diversity within the horror space. It's fantastic. Diversity in gender, diversity in religious, socioeconomic backgrounds. It's a wonderful time to be a horror writer and a horror reader, just because there's so many stories that are being told today that weren't told, definitely not around Poe's time, not even 10, 20 years ago. So it's a fantastic time right now. And I know all of us, so many of us do love Poe. And so many of us first encountered horror in reading Poe. I know for me, it was reading The Raven, right? What was it, like third, fourth, or fifth grade? And so I think there was no turning back from there.
So one of the things I was thinking, because you sent these questions to us ahead of time, so I've been trying to think about them for the last couple of days. And one of the things that really popped out at me was, like I said, with Poe's work, it's all about premature death. It's all about dying, in your teens or your 20s. Obviously, that still absolutely happens now, but now we can live to be so much older. It's not rare for someone to live into their 60s, 70s, 80s, whereas it really was back then. Then I started thinking about how much that's scary unto itself. Aging can be scary. The body changes. I love writing body horror, so that's scary. But then also, and we touched upon this a little bit, economically aging is scary, because it's like, I have this horrible morbid joke to my husband. He's a little bit older than me, so he's a Gen Xer and I'm a millennial, and I have this joke that my millennial retirement plan is to just not live very long, because I don't have enough money to be able to survive. Like, I see people living to 100 and I'm like, that's so great. I can't afford to live to be that old. And so I think about the horror economically, that back in Poe's time, you were not usually living to be 100. You didn't have to budget out that much money. Whereas now it's like, how are you going to have housing for that long? How are you going to have healthcare for that long? There's a lot of things that, as much as it's great to live to be older, it's also scary in a different way. Obviously, dying young is very scary, but living to be old is, yes, somebody wrote in the comments, immortality without wealth can be a horrifying idea. In my book that I'm writing with Lucy Westenra and Bertha Antoinetta Mason, they are immortal, but they're very poor. And it's horrifying, because this is literally one of my total fears of like, how can you keep things going? We always think of like, oh, vampires, they have all this wealth, but what if you're a poor vampire? Like, how can you maintain that long of a life? And so that to me is like this kind of existential horror of, how do we do that? How, and that's something that maybe in Poe's time they weren't thinking about as much. So that's like my existential horror.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was just talking to my husband about that too, like this idea of aging and like, well, how much longer are we going to live for? Like, like thinking economically, like how are we going to support ourselves and children? Now we have to support them to a certain age. This is terrifying. And so those are things that I'm wondering. I'm just even thinking about some of Poe's works, like or the concepts of aging covered, not necessarily. Like that's really a new concept that we're covering in horror, which is like people are living much longer than they used to. And everybody, please buy all of Gwendolyn's books because she's going to live forever. We're going to deserve that.
I know every time I'm like, I should eat healthy. I'm like, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should have that extra piece of cheesecake, take a couple years off the life, help save me money. All the financial planning is always like, you need $2 million for retirement. And I'm like, I don't even have $5,000 right now, but okay, I'm glad to know we need millions of dollars. That's great to know.
Oh man.
This is a very Poe panel. You see how I got very morbid?
Right, yeah.
If you thought you were going to walk away inspired after this.
We still have a few questions left. We can like improve the mood.
Well, part of the question was big turning points, and I think the one I thought of first was the same thing Cynthia mentioned, the explosion of diversity, which is like injecting so much electricity into the genre now. Another one that I thought of though was like around the 10-ish, 15 years ago, I think the advent in lockstep with not social media, but the internet, with small press. Once small presses started really flourishing, when people were able to find each other and they could more easily find a readership, all these, all of a sudden, so many writers who weren't bestsellers got to be, they were able to find audiences. And I think that did wonders too for injecting a lot of new life into the genre. I think that's how a lot of people, my cohort, kind of came up through small presses. I suspect everyone here did too. And without them, I don't know if I don't know how many of us would have been able to find our readers. And I think that was a huge turning point in horror's development.
Yeah, because I think, I don't have a huge grasp on what publishing was like at the end of the 1800s. But I know, like, Louisa May Alcott is a really great example of someone who made a living writing and serializing adventure and really kind of gothic, dark stories in widely published newspapers. And I think Poe is actually kind of being published in sort of the same way. And then, like, things really started to shift when you hit the 1900s and you start getting more specialized presses coming out. You've got things like Weird Tales, and then, you have comic books, and you've got, there's just like sort of a shifting of, like, the mainstream got like less interested, and things, we sort of like undiversify in the mainstream, while small presses kind of dive in and out of existence, and magazines sort of help keep things alive. And it's sort of like weird to think about that happening. And then, like, in the 80s, you have like this giant explosion of horror coming from like huge publishers, but that's very, very, I feel like it was sort of like a lottery on who got to publish and who got big and who just tanked. It was really kind of a weird time too. And now you've got like this proliferation of small presses, and you've got, magazines that are just online. And I feel like you can see so many different things come and go in our genre. I mean, one thing that I've seen recently, like, Lisa Morton and Leslie Klinger have put together like this, the second volume of their series just came out, and I think they still have a third one to go. That's like Women of the Weird, and it's like women who wrote horror, and they've tracked down so many different women, many of lots of different ethnicities and all over the place, who were publishing but became obscure, right? And just sort of vanished into the mist of history. And it's like, it's so cool that like we have scholars today who are going back and like digging through this weird world of publishing that happened. And kind of like, it's like more archaeology than going to the library, I feel like.
I think one of the most interesting things we're seeing now is, after Poe, you can have a relatively easy time, especially if you know how to do research or if you know a librarian, sort of following the changes. And now it's really hard to keep track. There's so much greatness going on at the same time. You have, to echo what Cina was saying, you have Silvia Moreno Garcia and Stephen Graham Jones with horror novels in the New York Times bestsellers list. That's a change. That's an entire wave. You have Jordan Peele telling audiences racial horror is a thing, go look for it. And it's not only a thing when racists write about it. You have a Bird Box, Josh Malerman absolutely exploding and saying like, well, we don't have an excuse anymore to say that horror is a niche market because this thing was in SNL. So it's like you can try to keep track of everything that's going on, and unless you devote 3, 4, 5 hours a day to keeping track of everything that's happening simultaneously, you can't. And on top of the amazing, I think it's the golden age of indie presses, a lot of horror writers who were too weird or too impatient discovered self-publishing. And then it's like, whatever it is that you're into in terms of horror, you can find it. All you have to do is go look and you'll find it, which is a beautiful thing.
Which is great. Thank you, Gabino. Nathan, if you want to start this next one. So there's a bunch of writers who are in the audience right now. We always like to throw a very specific question for them. So for all the writers in attendance, what do you believe is the most important craft advice you could give someone working in horror today?
Well, that's a dicey question, because there's so many pieces of advice that I once found essential, which I now find absolutely useless. And everyone's approach is so specific to themselves that that it's hard to answer this kind of question usefully. That being said, I'm going to throw out a possibly useless answer. I think there are two things that I still find that I need to remind myself of. One is to shut off the internet for a variety of reasons, but I find it. This is also used. This is different for different people, of course, but I find it to be corrosive to the process, to my imaginative process. But that's not really craft. Craft, I'd say, finish things. If you start it, then finish it. I think if I had started doing that a long time ago, that I'd have a lot more done. And if you finish it, and if it's a mess, that's okay. As it can be fixed, or it can be discarded if that's what you decide needs to be done. But it will exist at least. It does no good to you or to anybody if it's just a half-formed idea or a half-written story. Finish what you start.
To add to Nathan, yes, social media has been, it has its positives, but it has its negatives. You're never going to please everyone. You're never going to make everybody happy. And if you want to make everybody happy, you're probably not in the right area, because it's tough. It really is. And so stepping away and focusing on yourself and focusing what you need to say, because once you start letting other voices in, it creates a danger in manipulating your voice, and you don't want to do that. Like that, you are the creator. You know what needs to be said and how it needs to be said. And if somebody doesn't like it, there's nothing you can do about that. Also, and that's not craft, but sorry. Writing is the long game. I've been writing fiction since like 2008. Before that, I was doing just nonfiction journalism. It's a long game. I've been doing this for a long time. You're going to see people shoot past you and do amazing things. You're going to see people kind of go quiet. There's always going to be like this push and pull. It's not a race. Look on your page. Don't look at anyone else's page, because it could be distracting and frustrating, because you can be like, wait, when am I going to get the bag of money and all the accolades? And it's like, it's true. It's, we're writers and we're writers, we're humans. We want to be recognized for our work, our hard work. And sometimes it doesn't happen, or sometimes it takes a long time. So look on your page. Slow and steady wins the race. And honestly, there is no race. There really is no race. There's no competition. You're your own competition. Just keep writing.
I like that. I like that.
I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
I also
say,
think
do it for the money and the power and the drugs and the sex. Really, that's what we're all here. Like, stop pretending, Cina. It's the money and the power and the drugs.
There's money and power and drugs. Great, now that's gonna get quoted and put on social media.
The horror scene is a lot different in Texas. I think I might move.
It's gonna get quoted on social media, and then he's gonna go viral, and he's gonna get a giant book deal off of it, and that's the key to success.
Sometimes bad publicity is good publicity, you guys.
I could tell you stories about hanging out with her and V Castro, but truth is I don't remember much. So, take it for what it is. Let's get serious for a minute. Advice that I usually give my students, because funnily enough, they have this same kind of question. First one that I tell those who love horror is stop trying to aim for scary. Horror can make you feel a whole bunch of things, and scary sometimes might not be one of them. And also, you don't know what scares people. I read about werewolves and witches and aliens and ghosts and haunted houses, and I laugh because I completely enjoy it. And then I read about poverty or sexual or mental abuse or a loved one getting cancer, and I go, oh shit. And it really punches me in the heart, and makes me unsettled, and it makes me I feel tension when I'm reading. So aim, and that ties into our second one. Aim to write whatever you think matters. Tell your story, the things that make you uncomfortable, the things that you want to say, whether they're religious or political or whatever they are, and you will find an audience. Trying to aim for whatever you think people are looking for. I'm going to be the next Stephen King. We already have one. I want to be the next, Tenerife Do. We have her. We're not looking for the next them. We're looking for the first you. So do whatever your heart tells you to do.
Yeah, that's similar to what I always like to say, and that's just write what you want to read. Like whatever it is you want to read that doesn't exist out there, that's what you need to be writing. And I know it, and I understand that like the desire to try to like hit what the market is doing right now, especially with short fiction writing, because it's like a lot of times there'll be certain anthologies, or all of a sudden you'll have a whole bunch of anthology calls that are kind of along a similar thing. And that can guide you a little bit. And sometimes that can even be fun, but I think you're absolutely right with the idea of, you can't like try to aim to be this other thing. You have to be who you are and write what you want to read. Also, kind of what Cina was saying, I was also thinking whenever you were saying all of that careers also aren't a straight line. We always have this idea that it's like, oh, we're just going to keep ascending. We're just going to keep climbing this ladder. And it's like, even like, you can make a lateral move. It's not necessarily that you've gone backwards, or heck, you could get a big book deal, then not have one for a while. That doesn't mean your career is a failure. We have too much of that. I think, especially with social media, this idea that you just have to keep going. And like you said, like somebody will shoot past you and it's like, oh, that's the only way it can go. But it's like, I like what you said, Cina, that, sometimes somebody will just go quiet for a while. Maybe they're working on writing, or maybe they're working on something else, and that's okay. And sometimes, I think especially with social media, there's the idea you have to have 2 or 3 books out every year. And if you can do that, I am serious. That is awesome. And I am happy for you. And I don't want to ever make anybody feel bad about that. But that just looks exhausting to me. I had like 3 books out last year, and it was so hard. Like I had one come out at the beginning of the year, one at the end, and one was even limited edition. I was so tired by the end of the year. And I was like, I don't even know if I promoted them all individually well enough. So I'm like, 1 book a year, 1 book every 2 years. Now, again, I won't have enough money. I'll have to die young, but I will not be stressed out in the meantime. So that's something.
Yeah, that's another thing about, you see so many submission calls, and then you're always trying to like write something else to meet the submission. And I got so burned out. And I just made a rule, and I was like, I can't anymore unless it's something that it's charity, or it's a very great editor team that's, and I believe in their vision, because I physically just cannot. There's only so many hours in a day. A lot of writers don't do this. I don't do this full time, so it's okay that you don't write full time. I did another panel recently where I stressed to people that you have to take care of yourself and you have to take care of your bills. You have to take care of your house. And guess what? If your writing is making everybody miserable in your house, see what you can kind of adjust, because nobody's happy when everybody's miserable. You want to create the work, but if you're just like I'm in this office almost all day writing, but I know I have to step out and eat with my family, and like they need to see me. And it's okay. The work is there. Don't feel overwhelmed like you have to have so many short stories out and you have to have so many books out a year. Like you're doing that to yourself. Nobody's expecting that of you. Just do the best work you can.
And I think also, forgive yourself. This goes along with what you're saying too about, the sense of competition that arises. But, it's impossible to be, especially online, and not compare yourself with other people, as you said. And I see a lot of people getting, and I was one of these people too, getting anxious about not having an early start or starting too late. And whatever it is in you that's a writer might not even show itself until you're in your 50s, and that's okay. Whatever it is in you that's a writer might work at a slower pace. You might write a book every decade. That's fine too. It doesn't make you any less of a writer. It's just a different kind of engine. And if we all were the same kind of writer, then well, we'd be writing all the same book. Nobody wants that. And so I think just be easy on yourself when you get online and you see what's happening to everybody around you.
I always want someone to be like, the most important craft advice I can give to a horror writer is put a cat in the story. Don't say anything again. It's like that's the one thing, and that's success. If only it was that easy. Let's jump. Or Wendy, did you have something?
Oh, I was gonna say, like, you should probably make like Poe and really work at using that M dash in a stylish and appealing way. Although seriously, I think like you should play around with your toolbox, right? Like, don't just get locked into writing things. Like, try making weird sentences, try playing around with punctuation you don't usually use. Look at the way you paragraph. Like, that's the thing. Like, writing is a craft, and the more tools you have in your toolbox, like the more fun you can have. So have fun.
I can't believe we all forgot. Now Wendy just reminded me. Number one, read all the time, as much as you can. Read all the books. Read while you're stuck in traffic. Read on your phone. Read instead of watching that series that you love for the 19th time. Read. Every time you read, you're going to class. So yeah, read.
Read outside the genre too. I
read everything.
Read everything. I read a lot of nonfiction. I read outside the genre. I read a lot of poetry. I'm huge. Even like fiction writers like freeze up sometimes when I say poetry, and I say, no, trust me, read some poetry and just read a page of poetry every day. It really treats your brain differently. And one thing I've been doing, or I've recommended to some writers, like try reading some poetry before you write your fiction. Just see what happens.
It will reboot your brain in cool new ways. I try to read a poem or two every single day.
I think especially if you're having any issues like just with like sentence mechanics and like imagery, like poetry is just all imagery. I mean, not necessarily, but a lot of it's just so based in just beautiful imagery in ways that a lot of times I don't think fiction writers think to access that kind of like more descriptive, like, yeah. So I love poetry for that. So I think that's like really great advice.
One last piece of advice I have, because Gwendolyn's here and she talks very highly of Ray Bradbury, and I'm obsessed with all things Ray Bradbury, and he like loved Poe as well. And I've noticed whenever I'm just stuck on a story on how to construct something, I'll go read a short story by Poor Bradbury. Like, I think there was one moment that I just kind of started reading Bradbury short stories, just start to finish, because I was just really stuck in how to construct things effectively. And so if you look at some of these people, it's not copying, but it's just seeing how things were constructed. It does help if you need some assistance in seeing how things were constructed.
It's kind of neat to read like from different decades and different eras, because people built sentences so differently, even just 50 years ago, but even more so 150 years ago. And you can really shake things up if you read from outside your decade, outside your ethnicity, outside your country. It'll give you whole new ways to think about the thoughts in your head. And I mean, that's 80% of our job, is thinking thoughts and trying to put them down on paper. So if you can play around with what's unspooling up there and shake it up a little, you can give your work a whole new life.
All right, so I think we're jumping to the next one. I think it's Gwendolyn's turn to go first. If I forgot the orders, guys, I really apologize. So Gwendolyn and everyone else, are there any elements of horror you personally think need more exploration? Any specific subgenres? And are there any topics, settings, and or tropes you believe have been overdone and need some spicing up?
Ooh. I'm going to go, even though it's probably been done to death, even now, but I love body horror. And I really love body horror from women's perspectives, because I think so far we've had, a lot of body horror over the years from men's perspectives. And I think that women and body horror go very well together. We give birth, and also obviously our bodily autonomy is always at risk. So like, these are things that are very much real horror for us. And so that's, I love body horror anyway. So I'm always like, right, more body horror, everybody, especially from female perspectives and transgender perspectives as well, because obviously their bodily autonomy is always at risk. It shouldn't be, just like women's shouldn't be, but this is still the world we're currently living in. And these are the perspectives that I would really love to see more of.
Gabino scratched his nose. That means you have a thought.
I would love to see a lot more people, because once you start talking to writers daily, you understand that there's rarely a writer who only loves one genre, but a lot of them are kind of afraid to mix and match. And go read folks like Brian Evanson, who will drop every single genre known to men and women and non-binary folks in one collection. Don't be afraid to do that. Your readers will go with you wherever you take them, and you might blow their minds in ways that you haven't done so yet. This is the time to mix genres. Not to say that writing pure horror is bad, because we all do it from time to time. It's the thing that we love. But if you have this idea that you really want to explore new areas, go for it. There's nothing to lose. People will thoroughly enjoy it.
I love historical horror, so I just want to see like different moments in history just like flipped on its head and given like a horror trope. If you've read like Amakatsu's The Hunger, about the Donner Party, I love that. Anything with a historical element, I'm there. So I mean, also just like overall, like anything that I think we need more exploration of. I just want to see different cities covered, different communities covered, from rural to urban. Just give me everything. I think, so much of what we read too is typically very westernized. Everything takes place a lot takes place in North America, but I want to be able to read, things that are going on in Singapore. Like I'm so fascinated with the world that we live in. And so there's just so many cool stories and folklore and historical events that can really be explored in horror.
Ballingrud Books is doing a series now of world horror anthologies, which is very welcome and I think long overdue. It's still one of our cultural blind spots, so you might enjoy looking at that.
Write bilingual stuff. Don't be afraid. use whichever other language you speak, and go for it.
Did your door just open itself?
The door just opened.
It happens.
Was it the ghost from Corey's library? Did they go visit you?
From time to time. Yeah, there's another one that likes to knock on the wall downstairs, but use all of that. We're all haunted in different ways, so use all of it.
We're all haunted in different ways. That's amazing. That might be the quote from tonight. That's beautiful. I love it.
So good.
It's true.
I'm gonna tweet that and quote you.
Oh man. Well, I for one can never get enough like science fiction horror, like when it's done well. Like I want the next Alien or something. I love that sort of thing. Although I feel like right now, like the slasher is like it's having a really big moment again, with like, Stephen Graham Jones and Grady Hendrix have like made it the year of the slasher, I think.
I love that you said that sci-fi horror when it's done well, but I sometimes even love it when it's done terribly.
Oh my gosh, no, I
anything in space, I think it's funny. Like, so I just saw on like Facebook, somebody was like, oh, that Pinhead in space one, the Hellraiser one. I'm like, I thought that was hilarious. Like, I just love it. I find it so amusing. So I'm like, anything in space. I don't care that it's a gimmick. I think it's fun.
Yay. I gotta say, we just like started using Tubi, which is kind of like TV, but through your computer, and it's like a gem of the worst, best, every kind of movie. Like it's B grade everything. So if you like me, like B grade stuff, it is a wonderful.
So just real quickly, the librarian in me has to do the reader's advisory thing, which we always do, where we're talking about blending genres, doing stuff in space, getting real weird with it. If people haven't read Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, that is a blending of like horror, sci-fi, fantasy. It's like necromancers in space, old family drama. It's insane, and it's got the most crude, crass humor you've ever read, and it's amazing.
Yay.
Put that on the list. Let's jump to our last question before we dive into Q&A. Everyone's already been asked to start, so let's go with Gabino because he started. So Gabino and everyone else, what up-and-coming horror writers should readers have on their radar? And what are some of your favorite books that have been released in the last year or are slated for the upcoming year?
That's a weird mix. Upcoming, Eric LaRocca. Go read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. And I know that's a hell of a title, but the book is as good as that title is long. And I think he's going to be taking over in a couple of years. From this year, let's see, My Heart is a Chainsaw. It's the go-to. It's a love letter. And here's one that's I think it came out today. My review will be up soon. Gus Moreno, This Thing Between Us, is incredibly well written. It's probably the debut of the year. So Gus Moreno, This Thing Between Us.
Cool.
Yeah. And everybody on this panel.
I was gonna say the same thing. My Heart is a Chainsaw. The Last House on the Needless Street.
Yeah.
The Cadrian Award.
Yeah.
I've been in terms of like other up and comers. Haley Piper. We were talking about body horror. Haley Piper. All things Haley Piper. There's this really cute, like, if you like YA horror, Diana Rodriguez Wallach just released a fun young adult horror novel called Small Town Monsters. Another up-and-comer, Rhonda R.J. Joseph, Rhonda Garcia. So yeah, that definitely Haley Piper, Rhonda, Diana Rodriguez Wallach.
Yeah, I was going to mention Eric LaRocca and Haley Piper too, so glad to see that mentioned. Another one is Jen E. Rockland, who's got a novella about to come out called Flowers for the Sea. Oh, I'm sorry. I think they're a fantastic writer. And two of the books that have come out this year, these are not necessarily new writers, but they're breakout books for them. So they're going to be new to a lot of folks. Like has already been mentioned, that Last House on Needless Street is just phenomenal. I've been hearing hype about this book for a year, and I finally got my mitts on it. And it it fully lives up to the hype. And Sarah Langen's Good Neighbors.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful book.
I never know who to consider an up and comer or not, because the two I'm going to name really have been around for years now. But Krista Carmen and Eden Royce. Eden Royce, her debut novel Root Magic came out earlier this year, and Eden is just incredible. I've loved Eden's work. She's had a number of short story collections. She's fantastic. So definitely look up Root Magic if you haven't read that yet, because she's great.
That book was so cute. I feel like because it's like kind of mid-grade, and I just feel like I want to go and give it to like every kid I know, because it's just like really like, it's warm and good feeling, but it's got lots of scary stuff. And she does a terrific job. I love to see, like, it seems like kids horror is kind of, picking up a little, and I just feel like her book is a great example of how it's kind of burning up again. It's super great. Let's see. I mean, people brought up three of the major voices that I really wanted to shout about, like Zen E. Rockland and Haley Piper and Eric LaRocca, who was supposed to be here tonight, but got me instead. I'm super sorry. If you like Gothic stuff, Caitlin Starling is a really great queer and autistic voice, and her new novel that just came out, The Death of Jane Lawrence, is super fun and terrific. It mixes sort of like math and Gothic fiction with a taste of cosmic horror that is really a blast. I also, let's see, some other folks. I know that Donye Coles has a really scary looking novella that's going to come out in the beginning of 2022. I can't off the top of my mind think of what it's called, but I remember she just announced it not that long ago, and I was excited. She's a cool writer. We had her, she had a piece of Flash in Nightmare magazine just a couple of months ago that was really fun and messed up. And then I think another person who I really like, and I published them at Nightmare, is Gordon H. White. He has a new novella out right now called Rookfield that looks like a real blast. So that's fun.
And he's here, so shout out, because I think I saw his name.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Hi, Gordon.
Two more names I want to say. Forgot to mention Cassandra Caw, her novella.
Oh, yeah.
Black and Teeth.
Yes.
I think she's a very exciting writer. And it was just mentioned in chat, Gretchen Felker Martin. Definitely somebody to watch as well.
Yeah, Cassandra Caw and Zen E. Rockland and Craig Lawrence Gidney and I are all doing a panel on body horror at the Barrel House Writing Conference at the end of the month. So if that's sort of your jam, you might try to find that. It should be really great because they're really gross people.
Being a librarian, I love that everyone just like adds to everyone's to be read pile, just like constantly. It's the best.
It's so dangerous.
My favorite thing about these. So we've reached the point of our night where we're going to start doing some Q&A. Before we do that, I'm going to throw in links to places where people can buy the author's books.
You just went on mute.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened.
Oh,
Unfortunate. I probably said some very profound things. And so yeah, I was just saying that throwing a bunch of book buying links into the chat. We believe it's like really important to support writers here. So if you can, feel free to check out those links. They're all the indie webs or different indie bookstores, particularly ones that the authors love or ones that are close to my library, because you got to like help your neighbors out, which is important. So check those out. And the way that the rest of this is going to work is the chat is open. So send in your questions. I'm going to moderate. I'll ask them. And we'll do like 20 minutes and then everyone can go on with their night and have a wonderful evening or mid-afternoon if you're in California, I guess. I don't time frames or time stuff doesn't make sense to me.
I Time is a flat circle.
It is. I should also comment that everyone who came to also watch Eric give a talk, he last minute couldn't make it. So I apologize to anyone who was really excited to see Eric, but his books are awesome. Like, you should definitely check them out. And yeah.
I should have just pretended to be him. Hi, I'm Eric. I'm extremely cool. Read my books.
That would have been really hilarious if you like dressed up as him and showed up like, oh, nothing's different here.
That would have been amazing.
And while you're cooking up your questions, major shout out to folks like Corey and Becky Spratford and all the rest of the librarians who do everything in their power to bring horror to the masses, because they're heroes of the genre.
Yes, big shout out to Becky. She's the nicest lady, and we should also just say that she had her reader's advisory guide to horror. I think it's the 3rd edition. She and I talk a little bit about it, and she talks to a couple other librarians about it. But it just came out, and if you live in a town where your library might not know as much about horror, might not have as many books on the shelf for you, you can always go in and suggest that they buy any of the books that have been mentioned here. But you can also mention Becky's book, because it basically helps librarians navigate the world of horror who might not be familiar, and it helps with reader's advisory. So if someone wants like a slasher and the librarian has no idea like where to point them, they can crack this book open and there's a whole list of the top 10 contemporary slashers and like what elements you might like. So definitely check that out and support that all you can.
So cool.
And we've got questions coming in.
Ooh.
Mostly just funny comments.
People really like librarians on the chat.
I know, it's great. I'm just like, yes, talk about
it. It's a bunch of librarians sending mutual love in the comments. Awesome. Emily, Anita, hey. Librarians are having a moment, yes.
So we're having a slow question night. So why don't we do the one question that I skipped for the sake of time while someone else throws something in. This is my favorite question to ask anyone ever. And you don't have to answer related to horror or to writing, but say I show up at your house and I hand you this time machine and I say, here's your time machine. You go back and tell your old self one thing, your young self one thing. I hand you the time machine. What do you say to young you?
Stop. Be nicer to yourself. Be kinder to yourself. I am my worst critic, and I definitely get in really intense negative thought loops. And I married the most optimistic, happy, sunshiny person on the planet, and I am the complete opposite. I am always very sad. And so I think if I had much younger been kinder to myself, things would have been easier. Especially in writing.
I'd say 2 things. Whatever you want, it's going to take a while. And second, there's no making it. That doesn't exist in this business. Making it is getting some words down, and then making it is finishing a manuscript, and then making it is getting through the editing process. And then once that's out, sell it and move on to the next. Maybe you got $100 for it. Maybe you got that 6-figure contract. You move on to the next. Those goalposts don't really exist. So if you're in it for the long haul, because making it is not a thing here.
Well, we need those big deals because we're going to live to like 100.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
We all need those big deals. So that way, when we get to 100,
But several,
we're not like,
several of them.
We're like me, y'all. I have a day job, so it's not, no. If you have a day job, it's okay. But if you don't, it's okay too. Everything's okay. There's no rules. Whatever works for you, honestly.
I'm weird. I don't know that I'd give my younger self necessarily advice. I don't know, because I'm like, I don't know. It's turned out okay so far. Like, it's all right. It's not terrible. I mean, like I said, I don't know what the future holds. I'm not like, but I think that, if anything, would be my advice to myself currently. Like, you don't know what the future holds. A year and a half ago, I never would have thought there was going to be a pandemic. This, if nothing else, has made me be like, you have no idea. You could do everything right. You could set all your goals and you can meet all your goals. And then a pandemic happens and everything's going to shift, whether or not you've done the right thing or not, because there's forces a lot bigger than us at play and things that aren't even necessarily like, that you could ever see coming. So like, part of me is like, I don't know. I'd just be like, hey, younger you, hey, younger me. It's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. 2 thumbs up. You'll make it.
Oh man, I would totally tell my younger self to just start taking Benadryl sooner. Like, man, you're not sick all the time. You have allergies. Just take Benadryl. And I feel like my life could have been, I could have really had a much better younger 20 year.
I think I'd tell myself not to stop worrying about what other people are going to think. I think for the longest time, even till quite recently, I would keep getting hung up on, they're going to laugh at this. They're going to think this is stupid. They're going to think, what are they? They're going to think, they're going to, who knows what, all kinds of, whatever you could think of, it went through my head at some point. And to finally, just have to just say, who cares? Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
You're writing to fulfill something, in here. And if it has effects beyond that, that's great. But that you have no control over that. So just be honest, write something that feels honest. And if they laugh, then they laugh. The hell with them. It took me way too long to come to a place where I could feel that.
I feel like for every anxious writer out there, that's like the perfect advice. So
this was not for me, but in light of what Nathan just shared a couple months ago, my book was about to go into auction, and I was panicking. I didn't know how to deal with that or what that meant or what the outcome would be. And I found myself talking to the great Josh Mallerman. And I said, how did you do, your first one? And he walked me through the process. And at the end of that, he stopped and he said, most important thing is do whatever your agent says. And I said, why? And he says, because you don't know what the fuck you're doing. Neither do I. Nobody knows. And that it made me relax. Nobody knows what we're doing. So enjoy the ride.
Nice.
So now we've got the questions pouring in. So it's gonna be one of those, we're gonna sprint through some of them. The first one came in from Joseph. It's specifically for Nathan. And the question is, are you still working on any further stories in the Candlelight Society universe? Because I also would like to know.
Yes, I'm working on a novella. All I can say is the title is called The Symphony of the Lich.
Woo.
Yes. That makes me very happy. The next one's coming in from Zachariah. Zachariah asks, where did it go? Oh no, it got lost in the thing. The question was basically, we see a lot of crime and thriller and noir anthologies dealing with music, right? The anthology deals with a song or a band or whatever. What do we think about that in the realm of horror fiction? Why don't we see more of that in horror fiction? Or what music genre would you like to see someone randomly pop up and be like, open call, we're doing the World Infernal Friendship Society anthology call or something?
Well, there was just an anthology call that was death metal, so that one's coming soon.
Gabino, can we do a hip hop anthology, please?
Let's go. I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Hip hop and horror.
Yes.
Let's do it.
That's a good idea. If you want an anthology to happen, just ask Gabino and it will. That's what I've learned.
That is not necessarily true. I'll try.
And then
You look at editing machine.
Yeah.
Because if I sleep, the ghost gets me. So I just work all day and night. It's not healthy, but it keeps me alive.
Next one we got is from Sharon. Sharon wants to know, where does everyone get their inspiration for their stories from?
Everywhere.
post office in Schenectady, right? That's like what you're supposed to say.
Everywhere. Reading a lot. My kids, my son has like an amazing imagination. I wrote a kid's book that my agent is trying to find a home for, and it's dark fantasy. But I mean, just everywhere. I read a lot. Go out, now that we can go outside, listen to people's conversations. I'm super nosy. I love listening to people's conversations and what they're talking about. Television. I mean, if there's like a movie or a TV show that you see and you're like, well, that was good, but what if it was this way? That's a way that you can start kind of playing with ideas. So yeah, and everywhere.
I mean, isn't the problem having too many ideas, right?
Yeah.
Like the world is an idea machine that just puts ideas in your head all the time if you just like are paying attention. So like, yeah, just pay attention to your brain.
I wish I could write faster. That's like, I just wish. I think these people, they're like these amazing humans and they can crank out these multiple books a year, and it's like, I can't write that fast. But I wish I could, because there's so many story ideas.
And go inside too. Go, the thing that makes you ashamed, the thing inside you that always hurts. Go to that. That's telling you something, and I think there's power in there. There's energy in there for you to tap into again and again, because I can almost guarantee you, other people hurt for that same reason, and you will touch them with that.
David Lynch has a lovely book. It's really about meditation. But in it, he talks about how you have to take time and fish for the big fish, right? And how we often have things on the top levels of our minds that seem like great ideas, but they can be mirages. But within us, there's usually deeper meaning. Oh my gosh, dog. And like, when you reach for those, they come from those places of hurt and pain that Nathan's talking about. And it's scary to look in there, and it's scary to probe those things, but that is often like the most meaningful work and why we do this, right?
I love that David Lynch book too. I think I have it. I'm pretty sure I didn't get it from a library. Not that there's anything wrong with getting it from a library, but I think I have it on my bookshelf, and I love it because it's fairly short, and it's like really like easy to read through, and it's got just like David Lynch's weird wit in it, and so that's a really fun book, and it's very good if you're like kind of creatively stuck to reference.
Yeah.
So one thing that the librarian in me also has to mention is most middle-sized to larger libraries or library systems right now are in the process of digitizing all the back catalog of local newspapers. So like on Cape Cod, like you could get the Barnstable Register the Barnstable Patriot and the Yarmouth Register through my library. And like things were real weird 100 years ago. Like you'll go in there and you'll be like, oh, there was like a rat poison factory down the road. And you're like, oh, that's strange. And you can do endless fountain of knowledge and weird stuff. Next one we got before we get any further, Wendy, can you show us your dog?
Oh, I kind of held her up. She just ran away. Sorry.
Oh no, because your dog's very adorable.
She's pretty cute, yeah.
So let's jump to a question from Chris. And Chris is great. Chris has gone to like so many of these programs across COVID. So like, Chris, thank you for always being here and hanging out. Chris says, I am in the process of editing my first draft of my first novel.
Woohoo!
Right? I loved it until I started working with the rough draft. How do I get out of the spiral of hating it and not finishing it?
I hate to say this, but sometimes you'll almost always hate it. Sorry.
Yes.
I feel like, that could always happen.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. I mean, it's never done until your editor says it's done, and even then you're like, but there's still things I can do. I think you need to, if it's it might be the totality of it all, like looking at this whole thing that I hate, but maybe just kind of start at the beginning and just like work your way through. I work in different sections at a time, um, with different characters at a time, just because I feel like that's just easier for me. So maybe see if there's something different that you can work on, as opposed to starting like a A through Z edit, because maybe you just, or the simplest thing that I've heard other people say, put it away for a little bit and just think on it. That might help you. Or even journaling about what it is that is making you upset, because you might be able to find that there may be aspects of the story that you need to incorporate or pull out. So, I mean,
Another thing that I think can be really helpful is like when you're feeling really stuck on like your edits, is to sit down and try to write like a really awesome synopsis or back cover copy of your book, like you're advertising it to, you know, other people and or an agent or somebody like that. And just try to tap into what got you so excited about the project in the first place, because there's a reason you wrote that book, right? And sometimes in all the hard work and just piling the words up and like just feeling like there's a lot of problems, we can lose sight of the fact that this is something that really meant a lot to us, and there's exciting stuff still in it. And so if you can find a way to kind of refocus on that, it can really help you, like A, feel better about doing the work, but B, also it can kind of make you feel like, oh, I feel like I can resolve some of my feelings because I can see like where maybe my work didn't lead up to that great idea. And then you can kind of poke at that spot, you know, because you've identified it.
I like that what you said, because I think one of the things is sometimes you can't see the forest from the trees. Like you're just seeing this really awful tree, and it's like really just one bad sentence or one bad paragraph. And like I'm at least speaking from my experience, there can be like a paragraph that I just hate with like all of my heart. And I'm like, wow, I should burn this whole book. And then like I'll read the next page and oh, this page isn't so bad. It was just a really, really bad paragraph. So sometimes it's not that the whole thing is terrible. It's just like one sentence is giving you trouble and it just seems like, you know, the end of the world. But I think writers, maybe I shouldn't say this on a panel with other writers, but we can be a little melodramatic sometimes. We are a very intense group. And so always kind of keep that in mind, because that's something I have to tell myself sometimes, like, perhaps you are just being melodramatic. Maybe this is not actually the end of the world and you're just being a little artistic in the kind of stereotypical sense. And that sometimes helps bring me back down and be like, okay, and go take a walk, go hang out with your cats, you know, go talk to your husband, go do something kind of normal, and then come back and try not to be so melodramatic.
I mean, I literally once got a rejection and then like took all of my short story drafts that were lying around and like some paintings I've been working on, and I set them on fire. So no, writers can never be melodramatic, never.
I was like crying on the street today. And like, I called my husband. I'm just like, I hate myself. I'm awful. I'm a failure. And he's just like, you need a moment. Where are you? Just focus on the now. Like literally, you're just being artsy right now. Just stop. You're okay.
There's a lot of suffering here. Listen, here's a different thing that you can do. Pick one person that you want to prove wrong, and then be petty about it and use all your hatred to get it done. Don't cry in the streets if you don't have to. And don't burn shit. Like you might burn down the house. Just do that. Send it out to somebody, because a lot of times I remember when my first novel came out in France, like at 9:30 a.m. I got an email in choppy English, which no problem because it's also not my first language, saying that I should have never written that book. I was the worst writer to ever be published in France. I should probably quit and go find another job. And probably around noon, I got another email saying, "You are the most amazing writer that I've discovered this year. Your work means so much to me." You're gonna get those like daily, all right? Some people are gonna say you suck, and some people are gonna say you're awesome. Only believe half of them half of the time. there's parts of you that actually do suck, and there are parts of that is, they're actually super awesome. So take those parts and carry it forward and keep going.
He's a wise man, really wise.
I just don't punch your neighbor. Like, I don't want to go to prison again. So I've learned to cope with the editing process.
And don't look at reviews ever, like ever.
Yeah, they're not for you. They're for other writers, for other readers.
Look at the reviews. I mean,
Or if you do, just be careful. Like, if you do, just calibrate your expectations accordingly. I know some people are very, very invested in their Amazon and Goodreads rankings, and I understand it does help to sell books. I don't look at mine anymore unless somebody like positively tags me in it. And even then I'm like, do I really need to see this? Because I think there's also something to be said for not listening to too much hype about yourself either. Somebody gives you a really positive review, that can go to your head. Like, we always think the bad reviews are the only ones that are going to like affect our writing. Or if it doesn't go to your head, you could be like, well, my next book's completely different from this, and it can psych you out a little bit. So it's like, yeah, I've gotten very much to the point. I've always felt like we said, like, reviews are for people, if you want to read them, I read them, but I always kind of take other people's reviews with a grain of salt. Like, it's always like, that's their opinion. It gives me more of an idea of what something's about rather than, oh, this is the absolute authority on, any given review. So it's like, always think of those as being for other writers, other reviewers, and other readers rather than yourself, because that's a dangerous road to go down. Sometimes reviews are just mean, like especially on Goodreads. Sometimes it's not an honest review. It's just somebody who's in a bad mood that day and they're taking it out on you. Don't let that get to you. Don't let that get to you. It's not about you. Just don't read
it. I think this is Chris, I'm also in a very similar place to you right now, where I'm like wading through like endless edits. And in Stephen King's like On Writing, he's like, you're gonna cut like a third of it or something. And I never really was like took much stock in it until I was editing what I'm doing now. And I'm just cutting off like giant chunks here and there. I'm like, it's so much better. It's gone. This is great. I mean, you can't delete all of it, but like chunks is great. We have time for like 2 more quick questions. And one of them is like the perfect wrap-up question. So we're going to go with that one last. But we got one from Mike Davis, who runs the Lovecraft E-Zine, which is an amazing podcast. If you don't listen to it, you should. It's phenomenal. Love it. And I'm very excited for the next John Langan one. Just throwing it out there. Very excited about that. So Mike says, on my podcast, I like to ask authors and artists, what does success mean to you personally? And he'd love to hear what all of your thoughts are on that.
Getting to do what I love. That's it. That's success. If I can't do it because I have to do way too many other things and the day only has 24 hours, then I'm not happy. And I'm happy if I'm doing what I love. That's success.
Just sticking with it and telling the stories like we were saying that you want to read. As long as I'm doing that on some level, whether it's short stories, novellas, novels, whatever, that sounds pretty good.
My personal goal is to get published by a major publisher. It's like I feel like if I can get a big 4, big 5, then I can at least feel like I'll feel validated for myself. It's like my own personal goal. I've been working at it for like 12 years. We'll see. Hoping.
I can't see any into the future, but I have no doubt that will happen. Cina, I have absolutely no doubt that will happen. So
Yeah.
Sending you those vibes, it's going to happen.
Love you. Thank you.
A couple years back, John Carpenter was on tour with his band, like playing music from his movies, and it was really awesome. He came to Portland and he put on this really fantastic concert. And I really like John Carpenter. I really like his music. And, I just read a book, I can't remember what it's called, but it's kind of about like the history of like cinema in the 1970s and 80s and like horror cinema and how it developed. And it talked a lot about how John Carpenter didn't really want to become like, a genre movie maker. He started out, he thought he would make a genre movie and his career would kind of follow the same kind of path that like George Lucas has had. He made THX whatever, that number movie that he made. And he got, then he made Star Wars, and then he could do all these things. And anyway, so John Carpenter thought he was going to get to do a lot of different kinds of movies. George Romero kind of did too, and they got locked into a certain path. And I think both of them kind of found at a point in their life that they were like, actually, it's okay that my life didn't go this direction that I thought it was going to, because I'm really connecting with people, and my work is really important to them in like a special way. And I feel like when I watched that concert, I had this insight that John Carpenter had this career because he had found his weirdos. Like, we were all sitting there in this audience, and we were these weird people that just loved him completely. And I was like, that is what success is. It's finding your weirdos, Look, I'm getting all worked up about finding your people. But for me, that's what it's about. It's about connecting with the people that get my work. And maybe, who knows what that's going to look like? I might never be, a big four publisher. And at this point, I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah, this is a question I thought about a little bit in the last couple of years, because I had some good fortune with, the movie was made and the TV show was made. And I thought, well, this is it. This is what it means. This is what I've always, and then the Wounds came out, and they put the big star on the cover. It said, soon to be a major motion picture. And I was like, maybe the book will take off too. It's going to happen, maybe. And it didn't. The book didn't take off. The movie didn't light the world on fire. The TV show didn't get renewed. And, and it was depressing at first. And I was like, I had to kind of like think about, well, what is it that I want? What is it that I got here for? Or why am I doing this? And I think about it in terms of my daughter. It's like, when I'm at the end of my life, if I'm still cognizant, on my deathbed, if I have that moment, and you look back, what I think about as far as success in terms of writing goes is, if I can somehow keep doing it, I don't mind, if I can avoid being pulled by expectations of other people, whether it's publishers, whether it's readers, whether it's my colleagues, whatever, and just keep doing and writing what I could look back on and say, well, that felt true to me. That felt real to me. Then I think that I can that's how I look at success now. It's like, I've punched a clock my whole life, and I can keep on doing it my whole life. I'm not bothered by that. What would bother me is chasing after something that turns out to be false, and leaving behind a legacy of cosmetic, meaningless crap. That would bother me. So that's what it is. It's writing things that are real, for whatever that means.
I love that.
Was that everyone? Did we get everyone on that one? Sweet. Just throwing it there, if people haven't read Wounds yet, like, you really need to go and read Wounds. Like, I don't usually reread stuff. Like, I'm a one-time kind of person, but I've reread that collection like 3 times as of right now, and it's amazing. So just do yourself a favor and do it, and read everyone's work. Like, just go crazy. Just take a couple days off from work. Don't worry about what your is, and just read all of it. Read the whole canon. Don't actually get fired. Oh my God, I would feel so horrendous. Like, who's gonna take that advice from me though? Like, that, my real advice is become a librarian. It's a great job. So the last question, before we get to it, I'm just gonna throw up the book buying links one more time. Again, support people so that when Gwendolyn's 105, she can feel like everything will be good. She can still have a nice place to sleep. For everyone, please. So book buying links are there. So the final question comes from Levi. And the question is, what is your favorite story from Poe?
The Mask of the Red Death.
Telltale Heart.
To say poem, The Bells.
I think it's The Cask of Amontillado.
Nice.
Oh, I am now last. Now I have to. I'm gonna go with the black cat, but it bothered me as a kid because the cat dies, but then the cat comes back. So I guess it's okay. The cat gets cosmic revenge. So I'll go with the black cat.
I like my second runner.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so we've reached the end of our night tonight. So just real quick, if all the panelists could just stick around for like 2 seconds after I shut the thing down, that'd be great. But huge thanks to everyone who came out tonight. Huge thanks to Gwendolyn,
Thank you.
Nathan, and Cynthia, and Wendy, and Gabino. And just support your writers, support the people you like we're talking about, finding the weird crowd you want to hang out with, like figure out those writers and just hang out with them as much as you can, whether on the page or on the screen here. But also go to your library and tell your librarian you want weird books. Tell them you want horror. Tell them you want like a Western set in space. Like, can you find that for me? Because they'll find it for you. So do that and be kind to each other. So good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.